Welcome back to my channel. My name is Stacy, and we are going over my answers to the 21 questions journal, the answers that I put down last year to reflect. I'm revisiting them because so much has changed in my life in the last few months, and I want to make sure that the life that I'm creating still lines up with the life that I was reflecting on last year, so I can make any tweaks and changes that I might need to make in the event, that my engagement or the pregnancy or something like that changes what I wrote down. So I believe we are on question 14, and this is in the income and finance area of life. The 21 questions are broken into the 7 different areas of life, so that as you're reflecting, you touch on each area of your life, so that way when you go to create the life that's going to make you happy, it is a very intentional, conscious thing. So this question is, what is your best and worst purchase in the last 12 months and why? And I love this question because I think a lot of us, especially once we become adults, we just live our lives in a state of like, I'm just gonna pay bills until the day that I pass away. And that is such a passive way to live your life financially. And I think finances have been such a big focus of my life for the last few years. And I've noticed that the more I pay attention to money, the more I manage money, the better money and my money experience is. And so I love this question because it brings us back to this idea that even as adults, we can still make mistakes financially, and that's okay. Like, I think that, and I don't know who taught us this, but there's this idea that is running rampant among adults that like, we just shouldn't ever make a financial mistake, like ever again. Like, once you start making your own money, you can't make any financial mistakes. It's like, that's not how any of this works. Most of us, our parents never sat down and told us anything about money. We didn't learn anything about money in school. And so most of us are figuring out money through trial and error. So most of us are gonna make mistakes. But I think what happens is if you are making those mistakes and you're not reflecting on those mistakes, you're gonna be like most of the adult population who continues to make those mistakes year after year after year, because you're not taking the time to say, what was the mistake? What did I learn from it? Like, what can I do differently, et cetera, et cetera. So I like this question because it gives you that perspective on both the best and the worst, so that when you're looking at the best, it's like, okay, let me do more of that because of what I get from that, and let me do less of this because of what it's taken away. So for me, I'll tell you up front and then I'll give you my explanation. My worst purchase of 2023 was my luxury apartment. And I'll come back with an explanation for that in a second. And my best purchase, hands down, was doing this Billy bookcase built in. So let's start with the best. So doing this Billy bookcase built in was the best purchase of 2023. One, because it's something that I've wanted for a long time. I have moved like so many times. I need to add up how many times I've moved. I've moved so many times in the last decade. It is unreal. I would say in the last 10 years, I am confident that I have moved over more than 10 times. And the one item that has made it with me in all of those moves have been my books. Like, as heavy as that is, as many books as that is, like, even the idea that these books made it from my hometown of Omaha, Nebraska to Chicago, like, these are my prized possessions, are my books. And in the last 5 apartments that you guys will have seen me document here on my YouTube channel, I don't think you guys ever really got a chance to, well, you guys have actually seen 6 apartments. I don't think you guys have really ever got a chance to see my full collection or just to see my books in general, because I've never had a space that housed my books the way that I wanted my books to be housed. Even when I was in my studio, which is one of my all-time favorite apartments here in Chicago, when I got that bookshelf, I didn't necessarily love that bookshelf, but it went with the specs that I got from the interior designer. So I did get it and I did put my books on it, and it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough, but I did it. And then when I moved into my 2-bedroom, I hired someone to come and do shelves. Those weren't, right. When I moved into my luxury apartment, my books kind of just sat on the floor because I really didn't want to invest in any of the bookshelves that were on the market because they just weren't the vibe that I wanted. And it wasn't until I moved to this apartment that I was like, okay, this is the vibe that I want. I'm doing this IKEA Billy bookcase hack, and I'm just gonna do it. And it turned out better than I could have imagined. My task rabbit / carpenter was phenomenal. I came in under budget on it. Hands down, the best thing in all the land that I've done for my home and for myself. I get so much pleasure. There's so many different places where, like, if I'm looking from like the hallway in here, I can see the bookshelf. If I'm in the living, like, there, it's aesthetically pleasing. And I think something that I'm learning as it relates to like interior design and stuff like that is like, you need to put things visually around you that make you feel good, that bring you joy. Because if you're having a bad day and you walk out into a mess, it's going to deepen the stress that you're already experiencing. Not because it's adding, but because it's not subtracting. This shelf, seeing all of my books, seeing the color, like it being this massive focal point, brings me so much joy. Like when I think I can't do something or I can't figure out something, I'm like, well, look at that bookshelf, you did that. And that's the other thing too, because I DIY'd it, kind of like I put all the IKEA shelves together, I painted everything, I sanded everything. Yes, I had the task rabbit do all of the cutting of the wood and stuff like that, but I did all that other part. Like I learned so much about myself, my capacity, my strength, my perseverance, because it took a very long time, even my patience, because I painted this and then I had to let it cure for 30 days before I could put anything on it. So there was just so much fulfillment that comes from this bookshelf. Like the saddest part of whenever we move is knowing that I cannot fold this up into a box and take it with me. Like that is the saddest part. But will I be recreating this in our next home? Absolutely. Because I now understand, first of all, the type of shelf that I want. Second of all, what's going to be the cost to get it done. And like, third of all, like I just know that this is just something that when I invest in myself and I do this, the return is 100-fold. Whether it's like a backdrop for YouTube videos, or it's that aesthetically pleasing thing that lifts my mood, or it's a place to storage things, like it's just hands down the best thing. I would spend this money that I spent on this over and over and over 1,000 times and never ever feel like I wasted it. Hands down, it was a phenomenal purchase. That said, my worst purchase of 2023 was my luxury apartment. And I will qualify this. So I was in my luxury apartment for 22 months, so a little under 2 years. And from a psychological perspective, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, psychologically, all of those leads, best decision in the world. I needed the safety. I needed the security. I needed the privacy. I needed a different experience. I needed the support. I needed what that apartment gave. I needed the amenities. I needed the conveniences. And I needed that because I was coming from an apartment that I was so terribly triggered in that apartment, and I had no idea. It was a beautiful apartment, but where it was located and the things that were happening to me in that apartment hurt a lot. And I was in such a state of pain, like mentally and emotionally. And you can go back and you can see that video and you can see that I am like hurting. And yeah, like I really liked that apartment, but it was just not a good place for me to live. And so the luxury apartment was in part a reaction to some of the experiences that I had in that apartment with respect to like people having access to me and like knowing where I live and stuff like that. But it was also in part because I was just in a financial position to be able to do it. So I say that to say, mentally, emotionally, physically, psychologically, great decision. Financially, worst decision in all the land. I would not repeat it. And when I say it was the worst decision financially, I mean that. And it wasn't until I was playing cash flow with my boyfriend at the time, now fiance, that I realized, because I'm like, how am I in the rat race? And it's because I took an expense that was always relatively low and fairly easy and very doable, and essentially tripled it. I think did I double it or triple it? I can't remember how much my apartment costs right now off the top of my head. I feel like I doubled it or tripled it, but to double it or triple it is insanity. But I didn't just double it and triple it once. That's double to triple every single month. And I did not realize the toll that would take on me financially until I played cash flow and I revisited some of the principles that were in there. And I was just like, oh, this is why this feels this way. It's like, and it was hard to realize that, like, while there was such incredible psychological benefit, the financial cost wasn't, it wasn't making sense. It wasn't making sense at all. And so it's so unfortunate, but it was 1,000% the worst purchase. And I probably should have known it because I kept downgrading in the apartment. And even if you watch the original video, you'll see that originally when I was going to move into the apartment, I was going to get the penthouse because it was in my budget. And I decided, I was like, oh, I don't really need the penthouse. Let me just get a regular 1-bedroom. So I ended up getting a regular 1-bedroom. And I think within like 9 or 10 months of living in the 1-bedroom, I was like, there's something, I don't know what it is. I can't figure out what it is. And I ended up downgrading into a convertible, which is essentially a studio, but a studio with a wall without a door. So it's like just a cozier one, a smaller, more cozier 1-bedroom. But the fact that, like, as I was in this particular apartment, I kept changing my mind and going smaller and smaller in the space, should have been an indication that it wasn't necessarily the place for me financially. But I think the comfort and support and ease and peace that I got psychologically made it difficult to walk away. But when I reflect on it, definitely the worst decision. And so when I think about what I learned about that worst decision, is like, I have to remember that for me and the way that my finances are set up, my monthly expenses, I want them all to be really, really low. I do not like high monthly expenses on anything: food, car, transportation, rent. I don't want any of those expenses that have to come out to be high, because that reoccurring payment is the thing that takes all of my disposable income. And it's like, that's like, duh, like obvious, but for some reason I lost sight of that. And I think when I was sharing this at the beginning of the year, before, I was talking about how, like, you know, if you're getting paid $5,000 a month, like, that is a lot of money. Like, how am I going to spend $5,000 a month? Like, what in the world could I possibly need or want to spend $5,000 a month? But when $3,000 of that is your rent, or even if you make $10,000 a month and $3,000 of that is your rent, it's like, it goes away very fast. And the experience that I was having in my luxury apartment was this felt sense of like being broke, even though I wasn't broke. Like, I don't ever want to be in a situation where I make $10,000 or I make $5,000, but I feel broke. That's insane to me. That is insanity to me. When I make $5,000, I want to feel like I made $5,000, but I won't feel that way if more than half is going towards rent, or if I'm making 10 and a third is going towards just to cover my rent. So I was like, oh, that equation was off. It was just terrible. And the fact that I, like, every month over and over and over, hands down the worst decision. I would not do it again. If I ever went into a luxury apartment again, I would go into it for a different reason, but I would definitely go into it with a different income. I don't think I would ever let it be 20 to 30% of my income. I think it would be somewhere closer to like 5% of my income. Even though that's not industry standard, because that feeling of making that much money but not feeling like I make that much money is not a feeling that I want to revisit, especially coming off of all of the financial work that I've done up to this point. So yeah, that was the best and worst purchase. And so I keep that in mind. Like, even as I'm planning now, right, we're going to eventually end up moving. You know, I'm going to have a baby, and there's going to be more of us who live here. We're going to outgrow this space. And so when we're thinking about where we're going to live in the city and how much room we're going to get in, like how much we're going to pay for that, I'm going to be much more clear on how to make a sound choice around that than I was in 2022 and 2023 when I was in that luxury apartment. I don't regret it because it was amazing for me psychologically, but it still was my worst decision. And two things can be true at once. So that is the answer to that question. I will talk to you all very, very soon.